Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into the world of Baruch Spinoza, a 17th century philosopher with some, well, let's say radical ideas about overcoming fear and suffering. His insights are said to be life-changing, so color me intrigued.
What strikes me about Spinoza is that he was essentially cast out from his community for his unconventional views. It's like, can you imagine being so ahead of your time that you get practically erased from history for questioning the status quo?
Yeah, talk about dedication to your ideas. So who was this guy, Spinoza, and why should we care about his ideas today?
Well, Spinoza lived a pretty humble life, working as a lens grinder. But he dedicated himself to understanding the very essence of reality. His philosophy, though definitely challenging, gives us a powerful way to understand how we might actually be creating our own suffering, and maybe more importantly, how to break free from it.
Okay, the idea that we create our own suffering, that's a bit unsettling, but also pretty fascinating. The source material mentions that suffering is all about our interpretation, not reality itself. Can you explain that a little more?
Absolutely. Spinoza argued that suffering doesn't come from the events themselves, but from our thoughts and beliefs about those events. For example, we might be afraid of, say, people talking about us or worry about failing at something. But often the suffering we feel is based on how we're seeing things, not necessarily reality.
Whoa, okay, that's making me rethink some of my own anxieties for sure. I've totally spent days stressing about stuff that never even happened. So you're saying we're not just like passive victims of our emotions, we can actually do something about it.
Yes. But before we can change how we interpret things, we need to understand one of Spinoza's most radical ideas: the illusion of free will.
Okay, this is where I get a little nervous. I've always believed in free will, you know. Is Spinoza saying we're all just robots programmed to act a certain way?
Not exactly. Spinoza didn't think we were mindless machines or anything like that. He argued that everything in the universe, including our thoughts and emotions, operates according to a necessary order, kind of like a cosmic domino effect. Every event, every choice, is a result of what came before, unfolding according to the laws of nature.
So instead of being in control of our destiny, we're more like ships on the ocean, appearing to steer but ultimately at the mercy of the currents and winds.
It's a great analogy. We might feel like we're making choices freely, but those choices are shaped by this complex web of causes and effects that came long before us.
That raises a big question. If we follow that logic, does it mean that even our suffering is, like, predetermined? Are we destined to feel a certain amount of anxiety or pain?
That's something a lot of people wrestle with. But here's the key difference. While the events that might trigger our suffering might be out of our control, how we respond to those events is where we have some agency. And that leads us to Spinoza's formula for overcoming suffering.
Okay, you've got me hooked. What exactly is this formula and how does it work?
Spinoza believed that to overcome suffering, it's not about changing the world around us, but about changing our understanding of it. He thought that by really grasping the deterministic nature of reality, we can change our perspective and find true freedom.
This sounds profound, but I gotta be honest, it's a little abstract for me right now. Can we break it down a bit more? Like, how can we actually use this formula in our everyday lives?
Sure. Let's start by noticing those moments when our interpretations are causing us unnecessary suffering. Let's take that example of worrying about someone talking badly about you. In those situations, it might help to ask ourselves, is this fear based on something real? Or is it just my imagination?
It sounds like almost a form of mindfulness, right? Like being present enough to recognize those automatic negative thoughts before they take over. But what if the fear is based on something real?
That's where the power of understanding comes in. By understanding that our emotional reaction is a product of our interpretation, we can choose a different response. This doesn't mean ignoring or burying our emotions, but getting to the root of them and then deciding how we want to react.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. But I have to admit, I'm still a bit unsettled by this whole no free will thing. Does that mean we're off the hook for our actions? If everything's predetermined, why even bother trying to be good or make a positive impact?
That's such an important question, and one that leads us to the ethical implications of Spinoza's philosophy, which is something we'll definitely explore further.
Well, you've certainly given me a lot to think about. It seems like this idea of determinism raises some big questions about responsibility and ethics. I'm really interested to hear more about how Spinoza addressed those issues.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Spinoza. We're really getting to the heart of it now, right? exploring how this idea of determinism impacts how we see actions and ethics.
And you brought up a crucial point. Does determinism mean we're not responsible for our actions? Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher. Like, if we don't have free will in the traditional sense, are we really accountable for our choices?
Spinoza wouldn't say we're completely off the hook. Even though our actions are determined, they're still a result of who we are, our desires, our understanding.
No, it's not about blame or guilt, but more about understanding the whole web of things that shape us and our actions.
Exactly. Spinoza didn't see this determinism as a way to just excuse ourselves. It's about gaining wisdom, compassion, realizing that everyone acts according to their nature, and that nature is shaped by things they can't control.
That makes sense. It's like you can't blame a fish for not climbing a tree, right? It's just not in its nature.
Exactly. And when we see ourselves and others through that lens, it's easier to let go of judgment, resentment. We can focus on understanding instead of blaming.
It's a really interesting way to look at it. But if we're not holding people accountable for bad actions, does that mean we just accept harmful behavior?
It's a valid concern, for sure. Spinoza knew that some actions hurt individuals, hurt society. He wasn't saying we should just passively accept harm.
Okay, so how do we balance this idea of a deterministic world with the need to address injustice and, encourage ethical behavior?
It all comes back to understanding for Spinoza. The more we understand why people do things, the consequences of actions, the better we are preventing harm. Remember, understanding was the real source of power for him.
So instead of focusing on punishment, we focus on educating and creating conditions that help people make better choices.
Yes, it's about recognizing what leads to those negative behaviors, fixing systemic problems, and giving people the education and opportunities to make better choices.
So it's like shifting from reacting to problems to preventing them.
Exactly. And this is where Spinoza is so relevant today. We're facing all these complex social issues, and often our response is just to blame and punish. We don't always try to understand the underlying causes.
It's like trying to put out a fire by yelling at it instead of cutting off the fuel source. It seems like Spinoza is telling us to look deeper, to understand how things are connected, and to approach problems with more compassion and knowledge.
Absolutely. And this applies to our own lives too. Remember that example of someone talking badly about you. Using Spinoza's formula, the first step is realizing that your fear, your suffering, it comes from your interpretation, not necessarily reality.
Right, like checking those automatic negative thoughts, looking at the evidence.
Exactly. Is there real proof that this person is talking badly about you? Or are you just assuming?
Like being a detective of our own minds, right? Gathering evidence before jumping to conclusions.
I love that. And often we find out our fears were baseless. But even if they're not, just knowing that our emotional reaction comes from our interpretation gives us the power to choose a different reaction.
So we're not suppressing our emotions, but we're understanding where they come from and then consciously choosing how we want to respond.
Precisely. And that's where understanding is so crucial, like Spinoza said. The more we understand ourselves, what triggers us, the roots of our suffering, the more freedom we have to choose a different path.
It's like a journey of self-discovery, self-mastery. But are there any specific tools or techniques we can use to apply Spinoza's ideas in our daily lives?
Oh, absolutely. One powerful tool is mindfulness. By paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, without judgment, we can start to see those negative thought patterns that cause suffering.
And then we can challenge those thoughts, look for different interpretations, focus on what we can actually control.
Exactly. It's also important to cultivate gratitude, appreciate the good things we have. Often our suffering comes from focusing on what we lack, what we fear, what we see as unfair.
It's like that saying, comparison is the thief of joy, right? We get so caught up in what we don't have, we forget to appreciate what we do have.
Exactly. And when we shift our focus to gratitude, we naturally start to feel more content, more peaceful.
Okay, it's all starting to click, but there's one thing I'm still grappling with. If everything is predetermined, like we're all just actors in this cosmic play, does that mean life is meaningless?
That's a question philosophers have been asking for ages, and it's one we need to explore in the final part of our deep dive. Stick with us as we unpack Spinoza's view on meaning, purpose, and living a fulfilling life, even in a deterministic universe.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring some really heavy stuff with Spinoza, haven't we? Like this idea that everything in the universe, even our thoughts and actions, follows a set order. It really makes you rethink the whole idea of free will. But if everything is predetermined, does that mean life has no meaning?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's a question that's puzzled philosophers forever, and it's one that Spinoza tackled head-on.
So how did he square this idea of a deterministic universe with finding meaning and purpose in life?
For Spinoza, meaning wasn't something you find out there in the world, like some kind of preordained plan. It came from understanding and accepting our place in the grand scheme of things.
So instead of searching for our destiny, we create meaning through what we do and how we understand the world.
Exactly. Spinoza believed true freedom was about aligning ourselves with the natural order, understanding those universal laws, and finding our place within them.
It's like shifting from seeing meaning as a destination to seeing it as a journey, right? It's not about reaching some external goal, but about finding purpose in the process of learning and growing.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Spinoza connected this process of understanding with joy and fulfillment. The more we grasp how everything's connected, the more we feel a sense of belonging and wonder.
It's like those aha moments when you learn something new and suddenly the world makes a bit more sense. You see things from a whole new angle.
Precisely. Spinoza saw those moments of understanding as glimpses into the nature of God, which for him was the universe itself.
So meaning doesn't come from some afterlife or divine reward. It's about finding it right here, right now, in the awe-inspiring complexity of the universe.
Yes, and this changes how we live. If meaning comes from understanding, then our ultimate goals become knowledge, wisdom, compassion.
So Spinoza's advocating for a life of constant learning and growth, where we embrace curiosity, question everything, and strive to see the world more clearly.
You got it. And for Spinoza, this wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was deeply ethical.
Oh, how so?
Remember, for Spinoza, understanding leads to greater compassion and acceptance. When we realize everything is connected, we see that hurting others ultimately hurts ourselves. We understand that everyone acts according to their nature, shaped by forces beyond their control.
So instead of judgment and blame, we move towards empathy and forgiveness.
Exactly. And that's incredibly freeing. It lets us release anger, resentment, the need to control others. It allows us to focus on what we can control, our own thoughts, actions, and responses.
Spinoza's philosophy seems to offer a path to change, both for ourselves and society. By embracing understanding, we cultivate peace, wisdom, and compassion, both within us and in the world around us.
That's a powerful insight. And while Spinoza's ideas might have seemed radical back then, they really speak to a lot of people today.
It's amazing how a philosopher from the 1600s can still be so relevant to our lives today.
It really shows you the power of philosophy to help us understand ourselves and navigate life's complexities.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Spinoza, what's one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to think about?
If I had to choose just one, it would be this. Meaning isn't something you find, it's something you create. We create meaning through our understanding, our actions, and our relationships with the world and each other.
What a great thought to leave us with. So if you're feeling lost or searching for meaning, remember Spinoza's wisdom. Be curious, seek understanding, cultivate compassion, and know that you have the power to create a life of purpose, even in a deterministic universe.
And never underestimate the power of philosophy to make you question everything and open your mind to new perspectives.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Spinoza's world. We hope you've gained some new insights and are inspired to explore his ideas further.
Until next time, keep questioning and keep diving deep.